hard. Make that block stick. Make it stick. No, 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 no! Kalodny! Quick! Kalodny, this is critical. All right, this is R78 power reverse. I gotta get this into the ball game as soon as I can. This gotta... Kalodny, pay attention. This is about as important as anything you're gonna do for this club. Way to go, Kalodny! Way to go! All right!
Xerox is applying its technology to all phases of communication. Whether it be in business, government, education, medicine, or even landing men on the moon. At Xerox, we're working to find new ways of getting information to people who need it. And most important, when they need it.
Here it is. Everybody gets one. Okay, terrific. Go. All right, go. Set. 385. 384.
Incorporating an established set of rules and norms in managing and leading a business is of unequivocal importance, especially when the individuals involved with leading that business stand to gain personally by violating the established rules at the detriment of stakeholders. Enter the scandalous fraud at Xerox Corporation that occurred in the late 1990s until 2000 and stemmed from corporate greed from management coupled with an unrelenting desire to prop up the company's stock price at the cost of external stakeholders. Executives at the top purposefully misled investors as to the true underlying operational performance of the company by improperly utilizing cookie jar accounting methods and through improper recording of long-term leases in what amounted to highly unethical revenue recognition principles. Tonight, on this segment of 75 minutes, we delve into the accounting scandal at Xerox in great detail, relying on expert insight from a leading investigative journalist and bringing on key figures from the incident, including former CEO Paul Allaire and CFO Barry Romerel, who were at the helm of Xerox at the time the fraud was committed. The KPMG audit partner, who was asleep at the wheel, and the daughter of whistleblower James Bingham, who will share her father's story in challenging corrupt leadership to uncover extensive fraud. The story of Xerox exemplifies the very real consequences of beginning to stray from one's ethical decision-making principles. At Xerox, what began as small deviances from this sort of ethical decision-making ended up in a complete disaster. While these changes from true earnings were small and de minimis at first, they became much larger and material over time, and spiraled utterly out of control, as Xerox began inflating their quarterly earnings per share in the range between as much as 19 to 36% in the years between 1997 and 2000. The management, under Paul Allaire and Barry Romerel, began to convey a message of hitting the numbers above all else. Given the fact that stocks in the public market usually trade significantly up or down based on the difference or disparity between reported earnings and consensus earnings, the slightest misses or beats on earnings had a very significant impact on stock prices. Xerox utilized highly unethical, one-off accounting trickery and other financial shenanigans to inflate earnings, and this subsequently played a massive role in buoying the stock price, which would have otherwise fallen off a cliff if investors were made aware of the true underlying problems of the business that management was covering up. All the while, top management cashed in on stock sales and performance bonuses during the time of the fraud. The KPMG audit partners were asleep at the wheel and gave Xerox free and unchecked rein to stray from previously relied upon accounting principles without disclosure for the blatant purpose of misstating true earnings in order to maintain a false facade for investors that Xerox was actually growing in revenues and earnings. Inside, the picture was very different, and the core operations of the company began to crumble before management's eyes, while investors and external stockholders were being defrauded. Today, on 75 Minutes, we will examine the backdrop of this case and delve into the finer details of the fraud, bringing in the key players involved with the scandal in order to assess what exactly went wrong at Xerox, and also to elucidate the ethical implications of the incident as they are pertinent for businesses today and in the future. Joining me on the show is Mark Maremount of the Wall Street Journal, who initially, through his investigative reports, brought many aspects of the Xerox case to public light. Mark's going to talk about Xerox's history, more about its operating core business, and also some of its competitors. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for being on the show.
Nice to be here, John.
So can you start with a little bit of how Xerox came into existence?
So Xerox, as we know the company today, came into existence in 1961. Before that, it was called the Haloid Photographic Company. The major milestone that led to this name change was the machine, actually, the Xerox 914. Introduced in 1959, Forbes called it the most successful product of all time. Obviously, after the iPhone came, that is. It was the first photographic copier of its kind. It was so popular that by 1961, the company had generated almost $61 million of revenue just from this one product. That is almost equivalent to $480 million in 2015 money. Its popularity is just amazing because the Oxford Dictionary actually added a word in their book called let's Xerox it, which actually meant let's photocopy it. Nobody else was using this before. You cannot overshadow how popular this product was, because by the end of 1965, this one product, just 914, had earned the company almost $600 million, which is almost $4.8 billion in 2015 money, at a time where technological innovation was almost stagnant.
So would you say the Xerox 914 was their core business line at this time?
Yes, definitely. Not just the 914. Actually, the entire line of their photocopiers, the 914, the 813, everything. I mean, the Xerox 914, if we talk about this, that was a product that started an entirely new industry. And the company wanted to develop new machines extensively. They even set up a facility in Wilson Center for Research and Technology. To finance the phase of development and its operations, the company also published an IPO, and it got listed on New York Stock Exchange as Xerox Corporation in, I think, if I'm not wrong, 1961. So, as you can see, because they wanted this line to grow so extensively, they had to constantly finance the research, and they made sure that this is their core business product.
Okay. Were there other products along the way they developed in order to supplement the 914?
So what Xerox realized was that the 914 was way too big. It was almost as big as, I don't know, like a table, and that was not convenient for offices. So because they wanted to put in a machine, or I'd rather say bring out a machine that can be of commercial use, they developed the 813, as I mentioned. It was the first desktop plane copier, as in it was the first one of its kind that can be attached to a small military computer, which was revolutionary at that time because nobody else was doing this, and it could also fit into any office. It was almost the size of a conventional copier we see today. And this idea to develop a commercial product that can be put into any office, that was Chester Carlson's idea all along.
So Carlson was the founder?
Yes, definitely he was the founder. He founded the company in 1904, as I mentioned, the Haloid Photography Company. But he was also the guy who held all the patents for the, as he used to call it, the Xeroxography technology. That's what he called his technology of photocopying, and obviously that's how the name came into existence.
So what about revenues from these other product areas? How large were they in comparison?
Xerox was at the top of its game in the 1970s and also the 80s. They announced record earnings year after year, beating estimates each and every quarter for almost 10 years. Now that's uncanny. No one has heard about that. Even Apple cannot do this today. And Xerox was enjoying 100% market share. Now that, iPhone never did that because, obviously I'm comparing to iPhone again and again because that is a product that we consider revolutionary and a stepping stone for everyone else. Xerox was enjoying the same kind of reputation, I'd say. It had 100% market share. However, due to their monopoly, the Federal Trade Commission forced Xerox to let go all of their patents. That was a mandatory rule that Xerox had to follow, and even though they tried to go against it, the government simply denied it. It was a horrible time for them.
So the government was allowed to do that?
It's the government. They can do anything. They're animals. Right? So, because of their act, there was an abundance of competition from Japan. Companies like Sharp and Canon flooded the market with really cheap copiers, targeting the very, very low end of the market. Even IBM started making their own machines, and they targeted the mid-segment. However, Xerox's biggest competition, I'd say, was Kodak. Kodak was also targeting the really high end of the market where Xerox was. All of them were using the same technology because they were forced by the FTC to use it. And as a result, Xerox's market share dropped from 100% to 50% in 1981. And do you want to guess what was their market share 2 years later?
I would assume that it continued to decline.
It was just 8.4%. In 5 years, they went from 100% to a mere 8.4% in the United States. Having ignored all low-end competition, Xerox was forced to battle for survival. Japanese firms had solid quality, they were low-priced, and they were also really thorough office products, and they supplied a lot of OEM products. As a result, Xerox's return on assets fell by 19%.
Wow, that's a massive drop. What were the implications of that?
It is a really big drop. To bring back life to the company, Xerox started an equipment financing division. It is similar to what GE does with their engines nowadays. This was responsible for helping lease machines to various buyers who could not afford to pay the market price for it. This was a very successful department, and it recorded double-digit growth throughout the 90s. In 1997, I believe, the financial services department was responsible for almost 30% of the entire revenue. This was 7 years ago. This department accounted for 0%. Also in 1997, their revenue, I think, was around $18.2 billion, and that increased by $1.5 billion to $19.7 billion in 1999, mainly because of this very business. It was a tremendous success and a really good boon for the company, I'd say.
So it was a departure from their traditional core competency in printers, but definitely proved to be very instrumental for their growth in the 90s. Thanks for your insight, Mark.
Yeah.
So now joining me on the show, Barry Romerl, who was at the helm as CFO at Xerox in the period between 1997 and 2000. Welcome, Barry.
Thanks for having me here. First, I wanted to start this interview off by saying that this entire conversation is completely hypothetical. In no way am I admitting to these allegations that the SEC has put on us.
Thanks for that, Barry. Much appreciated. Can you begin to talk about what was the SEC alleging in terms of what you guys were doing from an accounting standpoint during your time as CFO?
They were basically saying that we're using one-off accounting journal entries and also using the cookie jar method in order to meet what Wall Street predicted that our stocks would do. So essentially, the street comes out with their projections before every quarterly, and that has a huge impact on how the stock price goes up and down, which impacts what money I make, which impacts what money all the stockholders make, which impacts the entire company. So they basically alleged that we use like kind of shaky accounting, and we would like take earnings from one period and move them to the next in order to meet or exceed these Wall Street predictions so that we could look like our company is succeeding. Basically, in terms of like what the most significant part of it was our capital leases. Capital leases essentially come down to, in a generally accepted accounting principle, there's a bunch of criteria, but the main gist of it is that you have to have, when you sell the product as a capital lease, the person you are giving it to, so in our case it's like copiers and printers with large businesses, they have to have it for 70% of the useful life, or they have to get the product at the end of the lease. So we did this with a ton of our products. That was our main thing. We actually were one of the first companies to have capital leases as our main business strategy. So capital leases were huge. And what they were alleging that we were doing is in a capital lease, you are allowed to report the fair market value of the price of the product, because it's essentially like you're selling it. They have the most of the useful life. So with this capital lease, we are allowed to put the fair market value. They said that instead of us just putting the fair market value in terms of like how much this equipment is going to make over the period of the life, we were also adding like financial services into the mix, and we are also adding like the cost of like repairs and what we were going to do for that into the mix, when they said that we should have just been including that during each individual period. So they said that that was a huge thing. Also, one of the other allegations against us that was huge was that we were taking operating leases, which operating leases is when you don't have that hit that 70% mark, when it could be that you only have 65, they only have 65% of the useful life, or it could mean that you're just selling quarterly leases. But they said that we took these operating leases and turned it into capital leases, so that instead of just taking the income from that quarter, we were taking the income of the future value of that cash flow, and we were putting it into that quarter so that we can meet these projections.
And that hypothetically would have overstated revenues.
Yes, hypothetically, that would have overstated revenues greatly, since our business model is based on capital leases.
So Barry, when we're talking about these alleged discrepancies from the intrinsic operating performance of the company and what you guys were reporting at Xerox at the time, what are the numbers we're talking about that were the differentials in terms of looking at original pre-tax earnings and then added earnings from the alleged accounting one-offs?
Well, if you take the numbers that the SEC put up and alleged that we used, then it would have been pretty massive. Basically, in 1997, the original pre-tax earnings was like $1.73 billion, and they said we add an extra $405 million with our accounting actions. 1998, $1.638 billion was the original, and we added $656 million. And then in 1999, the original pre-tax earnings were $1.525 billion, and the average earnings from the accounting actions were $511 million. So if you take that at face value, it's pretty significant. And then what they are alleging we're doing is we're trying to meet these first call consensuses. So basically the street comes up with this consensus that everybody believes that this is what they should be reaching as the target level. If you go higher, then the stock price is going to jump significantly. If you go lower, then they're going to see that as a huge underperformance. So in 1997, the first call consensus was $1.99. So based on their projections of what it would have been, if we did what they alleged that we did, the original earnings per share would be $1.65, and what we reported on our balance sheet was $2.02. So we outperformed the Wall Street consensus. 1998, the consensus was $2.33. Their earnings per share that they recalculated was $1.72, and ours was we projected that we got $2.61. And then in 1999, the consensus was $1.95. Their calculated earnings per share is 1.48, and what we were able to get after our alleged accounting actions was 1.96. So it did play a pretty significant role in helping us meet these Wall Street standards.
And all this, of course, is allegedly according to you. And just to be clear, when you use the term they, you're referring to the SEC and the calculations that they've come up to in terms of the amount of that discrepancy. So according to them, it would have had a very significant impact on EPS and the stock price if had it been impacted by the EPS without the accounting actions that the SEC was looking at, would have essentially fallen off a cliff during this time frame.
Yes, if you're taking the SEC's figures at face value, then yes, it would have been a big fraud, and it did play a big impact on our bottom line.
Between 1997 until 2000, when fraud allegedly occurred at Xerox Corporation, Paul Lalare was succeeded as CEO by Richard Toman, who was brought in to usher in Xerox into a more modern age, to have more competitive products and increase revenue and earnings growth. Many critiqued Toman as a mere puppet for Lalare, who later, after serving on the board of directors, came back on as CEO and Toman left. So first, I'll be speaking with Richard Toman about the type of culture and ethical decisions that were being made at Xerox from the top. Later on the show, we'll hear Lalare's side of the story. So now I'm joined with former Xerox CEO Richard Toman. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
First question that I wanted to ask you relates to Xerox corporate culture. What type of culture existed at the company at the time and also before the fraud or the alleged fraud began to occur in this time frame that we've been talking about?
Facing the intense competition in the market, our company screwed up with the implementation of strategic plan that we developed together. I ended up setting aggressive productivity and revenue goals. With the huge pressure coming from foreign and domestic market, our strategy had been poorly implemented by putting salespeople in unfamiliar territories like billing department. In order to pursue high-level quality of our product, the cost incurred was a lot higher than our major competitors. For example, I found out that our product cost on a copier was 30% higher than the one made by Canon. In addition, there were also low price in identical products from Japan. Many people thought I could perfectly fit in my position, but in fact, it was not the case. I never really got involved in the company as Lalare had the total control of the organization. That was the reason why I did not connect well enough with the people to get good feel of what is going on in the organization. In many ways, I was not good fit for Xerox culture. Due to bad implementation, Xerox was able to produce decent financial report to our investors, which leads to a lot of accounting problems.
So what was sort of the impetus for some of the financial shenanigans that began to occur at Xerox? Or stated another way, what was the driving force behind the allegations of fraud?
We do our business based on the belief that the documents represent the knowledge base of an organization and play a dynamic and central role in business, government, education, and other organizations. Our principal strategy was to focus the core of our business on the most profitable and highest growth segment of the document market. We put particular emphasis on color across our product lines and services. Our belief was that our customers' demands would increasingly move towards a higher demand for color documents. We also believe that our document industry would undergo a transformation towards digital technology, with documents being increasingly created and stored in a digital electronic form. With the internet increasing the amount of information that could be accessed in the form of electronic documents, I believe that we had the strength and technology to take advantage of those trends to represent the opportunities for future growth for the company. As Lalare introduced to me was the outline of Xerox 2000, which was actually a planned, updated total quality strategy plan called Leadership Xerox Cooperation Quality. This program was originally designed to provide Xerox employees working knowledge of total quality and tools and technology to achieve leadership and quality.
So next on the show, we have former CEO, in addition to being chairman of the board of Xerox, Paul Lalare. Thanks for joining us today, Paul. Hope you had a nice smooth flight up on your private jet.
It's nice to be here.
So I'm just going to cut right to the chase here. Did you commit any fraud in order to improve Xerox's stock at the cost of misleading investors?
We never committed any fraud of any kind. You can ask the SEC that. I think your question's a little fraudulent in that we never admitted to that. You know that yourself. I don't know why you're asking that question directly. We never committed any fraud. The only thing that happened at Xerox while I was CEO or chairman of the board was that we had a professional judgment call on one of our accounting devices. The SEC didn't agree with us. It happens. We paid a fine for it. We abided by that fine. We paid the fine. We paid our dues. And in no time and in no place, in no official document will you ever see that Xerox has admitted to or denied any allegations that the SEC has brought upon us. So I think using the word fraud isn't, ironically in itself, what you're saying is a little fraudulent because we never committed any fraud, not as my time CEO or during my time as chairman of the board.
So during your time as chairman of the board, let's go to that portion of your tenure at Xerox. A lot of critics allege that you had too much influence as chairman of the board over the CEO at the time, who was Richard Tillman. What do you have to people who voice those concerns?
Richard Tillman is a good friend of mine. It didn't work out with him, but he was his own man. He was the CEO of the company. Xerox at the time had asked me, the other members of the board, Richard himself, they asked me to become chairman of the board at the time. I had picked Richard to be my successor. And obviously I had full faith that he could do the job. He did a great job when he was at IBM. I thought he could do a great job for Xerox, and I think he did during his tenure. But I wouldn't say that I was controlling Richard or anything of that. We were friends, and I was there to advise him and help him along in any way that I could. But he was the CEO of Xerox.
So what would you say more specifically to the concerns that you undermined his power in the role of CEO and what many people would say forced him out of that role?
Well, I don't think if you ask anybody when they receive advice that they're undermining that person. I think when someone advises you or something, they're not undermining you. I don't think I undermined Richard by consulting with him, and he came to me and asked for help, and I went up to him and I gave him my ideas. Obviously, I think Barry Romero was a great member of the board of directors and a great CFO, and he had his ideas too. We were there to consult Richard. That's what a board of directors does. They're there to control the CEO, to look over the company, and to make sure that Xerox is performing at its highest ability. So we were there basically helping Richard, and I wouldn't say we were undermining him. I don't think advising someone is undermining somebody.
So looking back at the situation that occurred at Xerox, in addition to your role as CEO, you're also chairman of the board. I want to talk about some other key players in this whole scenario, namely the board of directors, which you oversaw at one point, and also the internal audit committee. So let's start with the internal audit committee. Where were they when you guys began to change your accounting practices? Did you disclose this to the internal audit committee and the board of directors? How did that process work out?
Well, we worked with our audit committee. We obviously needed to meet some of the street projections, and we were consistently working with our audit committee as well as KPMG, who were auditors at the time. We worked with them we thought we had a good change in accounting principles in order to adjust our numbers and get the numbers that we thought we had. And the audit committee worked well closely with us. Clearly, if you saw the SEC allegations, they were involved. Our controller was involved. Our assistant controller was, and our director of accounting policy were involved. But they were working with us, the board of directors, myself, Barry Romero, who was in the board of directors, as well as Richard Tillman, who was our CEO at the time. And we were working with the audit committee to figure out basically how best, what accounting principles we can use to put Xerox in the best shape possible with our financial reporting.
Okay, so all those figures that you just mentioned, Philip Fischbach, who was the controller at the time, Daniel Marcabrada, the assistant controller, Gregory Taylor, the director of accounting policy, they were all fined in the SEC case, along with yourself, Mr. Romero, also Mr. Tillman. So if they were applying best practice and sound principles, why did they end up being fined in the case? Can you explain that?
Well, that was never really proven, those were just allegations that the SEC had placed upon us. But we thought that, we had, given our form of business, we thought the capital leases were to our best advantage. Those were the principles that we used while using our financial reporting. And we did show growth during our time at Xerox. I think maybe they were fine. I guess, again, this is all hypothetically speaking, nothing of it was ever proven, but I guess if you look at it from their perspective, you could say allegedly that they did change accounting principles in order to show, growth that possibly wasn't there or revenue that possibly wasn't there. But I think that those allegations were never proven. But I think the audit committee worked with us in concert in order to get Xerox's best possible numbers out there, which we thought was legal and honest to God numbers, that showed our growth and our revenue.
Okay. So now what I want to go into more specifically is where was the board in all of this? And obviously you were CEO, also on the board, so it seems like you had an influence in both of those roles within the company. But where was the board in all of this?
Well, I was directly involved when I was the chairman of the board. Clearly, as being chairman of the board, you're always involved with the company. And we were, I guess, because of what was shown, because of what was proven by the SEC, even though we never admitted to any particular wrongdoing, we were at the forefront. Me and Barry Romero, the CFO of the company, we were the ones that were concerned with the numbers of Xerox. However, we never thought there was anything wrong with changing accounting practices. We thought we were doing the right thing for Xerox, and I would say yes. If you're asking me if me and our board of directors were directly involved, we were directly involved, but because we had to be directly involved. This was Xerox. We needed to improve the company. We had a tough turnaround, with the internet bubble bursting. We needed to perform better, and we thought that by changing our accounting practices, that would lead us to better performance. And I don't think there was anything wrong with it at the time. I agreed with our CFO.
Okay, so in 1998, there was allegedly operational growth underlying the business in Europe that was around 2%. At that same time, Xerox reported 10% growth in OUS revenues, so Xerox Europe, as I mentioned. And what surfaced as part of the SEC investigations was that CFO Barry Romero told Richard Toman and yourself possibly that Xerox executives within the time frame of 1997 until 2000 actually thought there was no growth in the underlying business, which runs very contrary to the publicly issued financial statements. So how would you respond to these types of criticisms?
Well, that was never proven, and I would say Xerox had some difficult years, but we still had growth. I mean, it wasn't perhaps the growth that, incredible growth, but we did have growth. I don't think I wouldn't say we out loud lied about our growth.
So you would disagree with the SEC?
I would disagree with the SEC. I think we used our professional judgment on our accounting principles. We thought that was the type of accounting that we wanted to go with Xerox, especially considering our type of business. And we obviously didn't see eye to eye with the SEC, but I wouldn't say that the numbers coming out of Xerox Europe were fraudulent in any case. I thought that going to our accounting principles, that was the growth that we showed for that year.
So on one of our more exciting segments of the show today, we're going to take an in-depth look at some of the financial accounting practices that were going on at Xerox that most would consider shady. Although management only admitted to quote-unquote misapplying the principles of GAAP accounting, we can see for ourselves the type of culture and principles that were exhibited by the management at Xerox, and we're going to do so by looking at some footage that we've uncovered.
Here are the legit financials. I don't think he's really gonna like it, but
Okay. I think it's just give it to him when he comes.
okay.
Gentlemen?
Here are the updated quarterly financials.
All right. What is this? Barry. Richard, really? This is what we have. This was quarter three's projections. This is what the street says. This is what we do. Those numbers aren't going to work. Now, someone give me a solution.
I mean, we could use leases and take future revenues and put them back to this current time period.
We'll have fixed our numbers.
Yeah, we'll meet the street.
Can we get it done in time?
Yeah, definitely.
Then stop wasting time. Let's get it done.
So based on what we just showed viewers in that video, it seemed that the culture was very intimidating at Xerox, and like I've mentioned repeatedly, the emphasis was on making the numbers above all else. Do you think this was a healthy culture, and what do you think about this video?
Well, first off, I'd like to point out that the video never shows any of our faces. These are just, you could be any three random people in any random conference room talking, to be quite honest with you. But let's just say for hypothetical sake that it was us. any culture of any company that wants to be great, like Xerox, it's going to be competitive. You're going to have, heated discussions. I'm not going to sit here and lie, saying that I never had a heated discussion with Barry or Richard or Philip or Greg or anybody part of the audit committee or the board of directors. We work in concert together. Sometimes when you work with people, you have heated conversations and there's intensity. And with any company that is trying to succeed is trying to meet the numbers. So of course there was some heated discussions and that there was some intense, conversations going back and forth between us. And I think it's part of a regular everyday culture. I think if you compete in anything or if you want to be great in anything, you have to have that little bit of competitive fire in you.
Yeah, well, thank you for offering all your hypothetical situations. It's definitely very much appreciated. And on that note, move on.
Joining me on the show is Joseph T. Boyle, the lead partner for KPMG who conducted the audit for Xerox. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, my pleasure.
First question I had for you is, what do you think about these SEC allegations that Xerox was overstating revenues and earnings by such great extents during the time that KPMG was conducting the audit on the company?
I think it is astonishing to see the SEC filed a civil complaint to KPMG and our 4 partners, including one former KPMG partner, in connection with the audits of the 1997 to 2000 financial statements of Xerox. Today's filing was clearly an injustice to KPMG. We believe the basic issue is the timing of revenue realized by Xerox on its leases. And at the very worst, this is a disagreement over a complex professional judgment. While we would have preferred to resolve this matter without litigations, we firmly believe we did the right thing. The action will in no way affect our ability to continue to serve our clients and help restore shareholder confidence in the future.
So the SEC alleges that some of KPMG member firms were warning KPMG LLP about some accounting inconsistencies going on at Xerox. What do you think about these allegations as the lead partner?
The SEC makes allegations that other member firms of KPMG International involved in audits of Xerox financial statements warned KPMG LLP regarding Xerox accounting methodology. These KPMG firms were simply meeting their professional responsibility in commenting on a complex methodology which required a number of professional judgments. One of the purposes of an audit is to raise questions. The comments were considered carefully by the engagement partners and were all resolved to partners' satisfaction.
In the period between 1997 and 2000, critics claim that KPMG allowed Xerox to depart from their traditional accounting standards and take on new accounting principles that they didn't disclose to investors. During this time period, did you find anything that was out of order in the financial statements or, like I stated, the accounting principles?
Yes, we did. As reported in Xerox October 2001 filing with SEC, KPMG insisted on numerous changes in Xerox financial reporting structure and personnel. And we provided a management letter identifying problems with the tone at the top of the company regarding financial reporting matters as a material weakness. We voiced concerns to Xerox management about the top-side accounting devices manipulated by the company's top management to increase its revenues and earnings. We believe the company needs to improve its analytic processes and controls to confirm that assumptions used are reasonable and that appropriate fair values are derived from existing methodologies. Me and several other partners were assigned to represent KPMG in front of Xerox Board of Directors and its audit committee. Xerox did nothing to address or correct our concerns, unfortunately.
So looking at the period in question, as the auditor, did you find anything that would make you believe that Xerox ethics should have been put into question?
Yes. Unfortunately, the reality is the audit committee at Xerox violated its integrity, ignored and even helped the company to cover improper accounting techniques to inflate its earnings. In May 2000, when accounting irregularities associated with Xerox Mexico operations were discovered, and the SEC launched an investigation at the Xerox Mexico subsidiary. At the same time, Xerox Audit Committee hired a Washington, D.C. law firm to conduct an independent investigation about what was happening at the Mexico subsidiary. However, Xerox gave explicit instructions to limit the scope of investigation. When the law firm found indications that aggressive accounting practices may have been used in other areas, they were told by the internal Xerox lawyers to stick with Mexico operation, and Xerox management, including its CFO, would look into accounting issues outside Mexico.
Joining us next on the show is actually going to be James Bingham. Originally, we had planned for James's daughter to come, but unfortunately due to unforeseen circumstances, which included her being hit in the head by an inflatable Oscar Mayer Wiener hot dog, which caused some slight traumatic injuries, she will be unable to make it. So my interview is going to be talking directly with James, and we're going to discuss some of the actions that James took as a whistleblower in uncovering the fraud central to our case study. Oh, hi James. Thanks for being here with us on the show. And to start, since you're a very central figure to this case and one of the definitely positive characters that helped to uncover this fraud, let's talk about some of your background. What were some of the things that kind of were formative experiences for you early in your life?
Hi, nice to be here. I'm a native of Stanford, attending high school near where Xerox imposing headquarters now stands in a wealthy Fairfield County. My family was well-to-do, and my father remains a well-known local judge. As a teenager, I was a rebellious and unmotivated student who challenged authority. I repeatedly refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
After your early formative experiences, what was your early career like?
Well, after working my way through a local business school for my MBA, I first took a job as a tax manager at the PricewaterhouseCoopers. And in 1985, I was hired by Xerox, eventually rising to the position of assistant treasurer, where my responsibilities include cash management and currency exposures. I also oversaw treasury functions for Xerox fast-growing development market group, which includes its operation in Mexico, Brazil, and parts of Asia. Although my brashness sometimes rankled superiors, I was called quote-unquote brisk and even arrogant. In my last annual performance review, my boss has praised me diligence and dedication.
So from your viewpoint, what began to happen at Xerox in the 1990s? What really was the beginning of their downfall internally?
As the 1990s wound down, Xerox was struggling with the renewed competition as the desktop printer ate into the copier use. A botched reorganization threw salespeople into unfamiliar territories and tied billing up in knots. Debt mounted. In our finance department, there was this growing pressure to compensate for the poor results with accounting gimmick. The upper management assigned accountants numerical goals to reduce profits through accounting actions. It just became standard operating procedure that, you had to look into the account to find income. Well, at first, I was enthusiastic participant in this intricate accounting maneuvers. I enjoyed them because they were intellectually challenged. I took the lead role in a serious transaction with banks in which Xerox packaged short-term rental agreements for copiers in Brazil and elsewhere as if they were long-term dealers, which were generally treated for accounting purposes as sales. This enabled Xerox to book immediately much of the future rental revenue.
So why did the culture at Xerox start to change at this time, and why did they start to pursue so many shady deals of questionable nature? Also, why did they begin to emphasize more focus on really meeting Wall Street's expectations at this time?
Well, the deals were done to help the company meet analysis earning expectations. investors weren't told about these transactions or the future revenues weren't being reduced. After finishing one deal with Citibank, I think I am a little bit depressed because it was obvious that the accounting was being sued to mark the problem. Everyone know it was a bunch of crap. Inside Xerox, the deterioration of the underlying business was no secret. Although Xerox was continuing to report good results to shareholders, Leslie Burns, Xerox investor relations chief, warned me in the early months of 1990 to get rid of my stock option because the company was falling apart in the seams and everything is broken. But you know something? Given the person who I am, I never sold my stock. The biggest scandal started in Mexico. It was a wake-up call for Xerox culture, in which manager was pressed to reach financial targets using aggressive accounting.
When did you begin to feel that there were irregularities, developing in the financial statements at Xerox?
The first public hint of bookkeeping troubles at Xerox came in May 2000, when the company announced that it had found a serious accounting irregularity in Mexico. Xerox was eventually fired more than a dozen managers in its Mexico and Latin American groups. The SEC began its probe, initially limited to Mexico at that time. Suddenly, concerns spread Xerox that the investigation would find out about other undisclosed accounting issues. I remember in a meeting in 2001 when I was at the office of Kevin Colburn, Xerox director of the worldwide audit, Mr. Colburn and Peter Gallagher, an accounting manager, discussing more than $500 million in special accounting action during the year of 1998 and 1999.
So what happened after the scandal became publicized?
Well, a few weeks after the scandal became public, I sent a memo to Xerox president and the chief financial officer, Barry Romario, outlining some of my concerns, and even sent it again after my boss ordered me to take it back. But I was removed from my position and later placed on a home leave. Unsure about how to proceed, I turned to Mr. Holzer, my job coach.
And how did Mr. Holzer see it?
Well, he was saying that I'm acting out of a sense of incredible corporate loyalty, but I thought that was a good chance for me, for the company to see the light and make me a hero, I guess. Anyways, offer one last chance to state my case. I spent days preparing a dense 25-page presentation. It was the most intense, and I'd never done it before. And on August 28, in a windowless conference room on the ground floor of Xerox headquarters, I delivered a blistering hour-long critique of Xerox accounting practices and corporate culture to Mr. Romero and two other senior executives as well. I concluded by saying that there was a high likelihood that the company has issued a misleading financial statements and public disclosure.
So following the incident, what happened next?
Well, 2 days later, I was fired.
How did you respond to being fired so promptly?
With no job, I was initially at a loss. One evening, I spent an hour and a half at a yard, motionless, watering a pair of pine trees, and then started to drink.
Mr. Bingham rejected a settlement offer from the company, roughly equal to a year's pay, and instead, the lawyer in November filed a lawsuit in Connecticut Superior Court in Stamford, claiming, among other things, that Bingham was wrongfully terminated for trying to rectify Xerox's quote-unquote fraudulent accounting and financial reporting practices. In its legal response, Xerox denied the allegations, and it wouldn't comment on any settlement offer. Xerox asked the court to issue a protective order to prevent Bingham from discussing proprietary material with the press, claiming, lastly, that he was violating an agreement not to disclose confidential Xerox information. Early this month, Mr. Bingham quit a part-time consulting job he had taken with a local accounting firm owned by a friend. Although the friend had taken him on partly as a favor, Mr. Bingham says his new boss was disappointed he was spending so much time on Xerox-related matters instead of his work at the new firm. The final straw came in late May when Mr. Bingham had just taken on a batch of new assignments. Soon after, Xerox released its accounting restatement in a lengthy filing with the SEC. Mr. Bingham pored over the document for hours. he spent several days composing an angry letter to Xerox's board of directors. Realizing he was hopelessly behind in his work, Mr. Bingham felt obligated to quit the consulting job. The Securities and Exchange Commission forced 6 former and current Xerox Corporation executives to pay $22 million in fines and other penalties related to settle civil fraud charges that stemmed from overstated revenues and profits that occurred during the period from 1997 till 2000 at the huge copier maker. The SEC said that the $1 million in civil penalties imposed on both former Chief Executive Officer Paul Allaire and former Chief Financial Officer Barry Romeril were the largest ever levied against individuals by the agency in a financial fraud case. In a harshly worded rebuke to managers at Xerox, once regarded as the epitome of blue-chip integrity, the SEC said the executives personally profited from bonuses and stock sales that were based on falsely reported financial results. The settlement comes at a time when securities regulators were already trying to restore investor confidence in U.S. corporations by going after the top management responsible for large debacles at Enron, Tyco International, and also WorldCom, now called, which was then changed to MCI, who were former Wall Street darlings. The message was that we're going to go after those involved in shaping the tone at the top who were engaged in financial fraud. This was the message coming from the SEC, who named these frauds, like the one that occurred at Xerox, as particularly egregious. In the culmination of the Xerox case, former CEO Allaire agreed to pay a total of $8.6 million in the settlement with the SEC, while Barry Romeril, former CFO, paid $5.2 million, and former CEO Richard Toman paid $6.8 million. The amounts included sums the SEC called disgorgements of the former executives' ill-gotten gains. Mr. Romeril, the former CFO, received a lifetime ban on serving as a director or officer of any public company. Allaire also agreed to such a ban for 5 years, while Richard Toman accepted a 3-year ban. Regulators also settled civil charges against Philip Fischbach, former controller, Daniel Marcabrata, former assistant controller, and Gregory B. Taylor. Under terms of the settlement, the defendants neither admitted nor denied wrongdoing. Allaire and Romeril issued a joint statement saying that they had, quote-unquote, decided to put the issue behind them and get on with their lives rather than undertake lengthy and expensive litigation of the issues. Director at the Center for Corporate Governance at a prominent university was quoted as saying that the overall amounts of fines and disgorgements, and in particular the ban from being able to serve in public companies moving forward, amounted to a quote-unquote pretty stiff penalty. This same director was quoted as saying that the agreement between Xerox's board and the SEC will serve as strong ammunition moving forward, which it did, as we'll get into later, for private lawsuits from aggrieved investors. The director also said that shareholders would continue to be angry against Xerox, for picking up the tab for the disgorgement fees. He said it made no sense and defied the purpose of the disgorgement fees, which is to essentially pay back the ill-gotten stock gains. The heaviest financial blow from the settlement with the SEC against Xerox was borne by the CEO, Paul Allaire. Allaire was forced to relinquish his board seat at Lucent Technologies, Priceline.com as well. At Lucent, Allaire served as chairman of the Audit and Finance Committee, ironically enough, given his unethical behavior at Xerox. Allaire was also the director of GlaxoSmithKline plc, a massive London-based pharmaceutical company. The SEC complaint alleged against Allaire talked about how Allaire, together with defendants, misled investors by using fraudulent accounting to hide Xerox's poor underlying results, which we talked about extensively throughout the film today. Through these actions, Allaire burnished his reputation on Wall Street and inflated his company's stock price. The complaint from the SEC also alleges that former top officials overstated Xerox's true equipment revenues by approximately $3 billion and its true pre-tax earnings by almost $1.5 billion in the period from 1997 until 2000. While painting a rosy picture for investors of robust earnings growth,
top executives at Xerox secretly acknowledged internally that the company was overstating its financial health, according to the SEC allegations. In September of 1998, Barry Romerl told the president of Fuji Xerox, a joint venture between Xerox and Fuji Photo Film Company, and also told Dallaire and Toman that Fuji Xerox's third quarter results would be quote-unquote a terrible blow toward meeting our shareholder expectations, according to the same SEC complaint. Finally, Romerl recommended that the company put a full-blown effort to evaluate what action, accounting and other, could be taken to mitigate the operational numbers, indicative of the unethical behavior that was occurring. Xerox's stock price reached a peak of almost $64 a share in the spring of 1999. The stock price began to fall sharply with an overall market decline as a result of the dot-com boom, but also fell even further directly as a result of allegations as concern surfaced over accounting irregularities at Xerox, and the company at the same time was forced to sell assets and cut costs by laying off thousands of employees directly related to the scandal that we've talked about today. By January of 2003, Xerox price hovered around $9. The SEC filed civil fraud charges against Xerox's former accountant, KPMG, and as of 2003, the U.S. Department of Justice was still pursuing a criminal investigation against Xerox's former executives. But as far as we know so far, this investigation has yielded no criminal prosecutions. The Xerox case study is unfortunately one, accordingly, where the executives in many ways were allowed to get away with murder. In 2008, shareholders of common stock and bonds who invested in Xerox between 1997 and 2002 were successful in pursuing a massive lawsuit against the company, which resulted in a $670 million settlement in which Xerox paid out in cash to investors who were resulted negatively as a result of this fraud. KPMG as well contributed $80 million into the settlement fund for their part in what amounted to a large shareholder defraudment at Xerox.